Seattle nights have this way about them, you know? All neon reflections bleeding onto the wet pavement of Puget Sound, the distant mournful groan of a ferry horn cutting through the drizzle. From our penthouse apartment, the city sprawled below like some intricate glittering circuit board, complex, beautiful, full of hidden connections. I'm Ethan. By trade, I'm a software architect. I find a certain peace in the clean logic of code, the elegance of a perfectly designed system. My life, or at least the curated version of it, felt like it was supposed to mirror that design, flawless, functional, predictable. And then there was Olivia, my wife. Olivia was a force, a whirlwind of charm, ambition, and an aesthetic sensibility so sharp it could draw blood. She was a curator at one of downtown's hottest contemporary art galleries, a world away from my own universe of algorithms and APIs. Her world was gallery openings shimmering with feigned interest, hushed conversations about the next big thing, and expensive wine sipped with practiced nonchalance. She moved through that world effortlessly, a native in a land where I always felt like a tourist fumbling with the local currency. We worked once, or I thought we did. Cozy evenings with Thai takeout and documentaries, spontaneous weekend escapes to the San Juan Islands, those late-night talks where you map out dreams and confess fears. It all felt like laying down the foundation, brick by solid brick, for the future we were building together. But like a subtle bug deep in the code, the cracks started showing. So small at first, you could almost convince yourself they weren't there. It began subtly. Olivia's late nights at the gallery became more frequent, bleeding into dinners I'd end up eating alone. Her phone, once casually tossed screen up on the coffee table, now lived face down or clutched tightly in her hand. There were muffled laughs cut short when I would walk into the room, followed by too quick explanation about some inside joke from work. She started talking about needing her own space, about personal growth, phrases that sounded reasonable on the surface, but felt like carefully constructed walls going up between us. Then came the new obsession. Collecting small, unique sculptures from obscure artists. At first I found it intriguing, a natural extension of her career, but these pieces, twisted metal shapes, strange ceramic figures, started appearing in the apartment with alarming regularity, and they weren't cheap. When I gently probed about the cost, Olivia would wave it away. "It's an investment, Ethan," she'd say breezily, or "got an amazing deal from an artist friend." I never saw a receipt. The acquisition seemed funded by some invisible account, separate from the finances we supposedly shared. Doubt, insidious as malware, started creeping into my thoughts. I fought it back, telling myself I was overreacting, that the pressure from the new product launch at my startup was making me paranoid. Olivia was still there, wasn't she? Still beautiful, still occasionally resting her head on my shoulder during a movie. But something had shifted behind her eyes, a cool, remote quality, like a part of her had logged out of our shared life while her avatar remained. "You're working too hard, Ethan," she murmured one evening, her tone soft, but edged with an impatience I was starting to recognize. I'd been staring blankly at my laptop screen, lost in thought, instead of watching whatever indie film she'd put on. "You need to relax, maybe take that week off you've been putting off." The suggestion, meant perhaps to sound caring, landed wrong. It felt less like concern and more like a nudge out the door. Did she want me gone for a week? Why? I tried to bridge the gap to reconnect. "How are things, Liv?" "Gallery okay?" "Oh, you know," she replied, her gaze fixed on the screen. "Same old, busy." Busy. That became her mantra. Busy, stressed, tired. Words that built a polite, impenetrable barrier between us, hiding a truth I didn't have the courage to face directly. My unease peaked the week of the Seattle Art Museum's annual gala, the absolute pinnacle of Olivia's social calendar. She'd been talking about it for weeks. The couture gown she'd commissioned, the influential collectors she needed to charm, how my presence as her supportive husband was utterly crucial. "I know this isn't really your scene, Ethan," she'd said, practicing walking in impossibly high heels across our polished concrete floors, her voice a little too bright, "but it means so much for my career. Just this one night?" I hated those damn things. Crowded rooms thick with pretension, surface-level chatter about art few truly understood, and the constant nagging feeling that I was merely an accessory pinned to the arm of the dazzling Olivia. But I agreed. Because that's what husbands did, right? because some desperate part of me still clung to the blueprint of a perfect marriage. Okay, Liv, I managed, forcing a smile. For you. She turned, beaming, but the light didn't quite reach her eyes. Wonderful. You won't regret it. Oh, God, if she only knew. Later that week, standing alone amid the glittering, oblivious crowd, nursing a watered-down old-fashioned, watching Olivia laugh, truly laugh, as she leaned intimately towards Julian Vance. Julian Vance, the notoriously slick art collector with eyes that appraised everything and a smirk that never faded. I knew. I knew that hairline crack I'd tried so hard to ignore had just fractured into a chasm. The perfect facade had shattered, revealing something colder, harder, and more broken than any faulty algorithm I'd ever debugged. The Seattle Art Museum, usually a place of quiet contemplation under a diffused gallery lighting, was transformed. Tonight it pulsed with a different kind of energy, a frenetic buzz fueled by champagne, ambition, and the barely concealed appraisals happening between sips and air kisses. Chandeliers dripped light onto curated crowds dressed in expensive fabrics. The air hummed with a low thrum of conversation, punctuated by bursts of practiced laughter. It smelled like money and perfume. Olivia naturally thrived in this environment. I just felt scanned, like a piece of outdated hardware someone was politely trying to ignore. I'd arrived late, deliberately, gave some excuse about a critical server issue needing my attention, a lie she probably saw right through but didn't question. Walking in, I felt the familiar wave of dissociation wash over me. Men in tailored suits that cost more than my first car nodded curtly, their eyes flicking past me to gauge who else was in the room. Women with surgically perfected smiles offered greetings that evaporated the second I turned away. It was a performance, a city-wide play, and I hadn't bothered to learn my lines. Clutching a glass of something amber that tasted vaguely of disappointment, likely a bourbon diluted beyond recognition, I scanned the main hall. Abstract sculptures loomed like silent, judgmental observers. Vivid canvases screamed color from the walls. And somewhere in this swirling chaos was Olivia, my wife. I spotted her across the vast, crowded space near the towering glass doors that opened onto a rain-slicked terrace overlooking the Sound. Even from a distance, she was luminous. The commissioned gown, a deep emerald silk that clung to her figure, caught the light. Her auburn hair was swept up in an intricate style that must have taken hours. She was holding court, a small circle captivated by whatever story she was weaving. Standard Olivia operating procedure. But then the circle shifted, parted slightly, and I saw who stood closest to her. Julian Vance. Of course. Vance, with his silvering temples, his predatory grace, and a reputation for collecting not just art, but also opportunities. His hand rested possessively on the small of her back, a gesture far too familiar, too casual for a mere acquaintance discussing brushstrokes. It wasn't the awkward hover of politeness, it was an anchor. Olivia tilted her head back and laughed, and it wasn't the polite, tinkling laugh she used for gallery patrons or potential donors. No, this was different. This was the uninhibited, throat-catching laugh I hadn't heard directed at me in months? Years? It was the kind of laugh that felt intimate, exclusive, a laugh meant only for him. My grip tightened on the glass, the cheap crystal suddenly feeling fragile. My breath hitched. It's just networking, a voice in my head tried to rationalize. She needs his connections. It's part of the game. But the game changed right before my eyes. He leaned down, whispered something in her ear. Her smile didn't falter, didn't waver. And then she rose on her toes, tilted her chin up, and kissed him. It wasn't a peck, not an air kiss that missed its mark, not a friendly European double-cheek thing. This was a real kiss. Mouths meeting, lingering just a fraction of a second too long to be anything but intentional. It was deliberate, bold, almost defiant. Right there under the museum lights, surrounded by the city's elite, as if she didn't care who saw, as if I didn't exist. And I was standing right there, maybe 50 feet away, close enough to see the slight flush on her cheeks the way his thumb brushed her jawline. Everything went quiet. The ambient roar of the party faded into a dull, static hum. The glittering figures around me seemed to freeze, becoming parts of the installation. My own internal systems crashed. No error message, no blue screen of death, just shut down. There was no surge of anger, no primal urge to storm across the polished floor and demand answers, like some scene from a cheap melodrama Olivia would have ironically enjoyed. There was only a profound or hollowing emptiness, a confirmation of a bug I'd suspected but hadn't wanted to isolate. I carefully placed my untouched drink on a passing waiter's tray, the condensation leaving a damp circle on the silver. I turned, my movements feeling strangely robotic, detached, and I walked out. No backward glance, no searching for her eyes in the crowd one last time. Just a steady, measured pace through the throng of oblivious partygoers, past the security guards in their ill-fitting blazers, through the heavy glass doors, and out into the night. The cool, damp Seattle air hit my face like a physical slap, bringing the world rushing back in sharp, painful focus. The drizzle had picked up, misting the streetlights and casting long, distorted reflections on the wet asphalt. I started walking. No destination in mind, no plan. Just the rhythmic slap of my dress shoes on the sidewalk and the dull, heavy throb of betrayal starting to bloom in my chest, cold and metallic. I walked for hours. Through Belltown, past the glowing marquees of shuttered theaters, down towards the waterfront where the air tasted of salt and diesel. I navigated streets I barely knew, cutting through neighborhoods I'd only ever seen from a car window. The rain plastered my hair to my forehead, seeped into the shoulders of my expensive, uncomfortable jacket. I didn't check my phone. Didn't need to. She wasn't looking for me. She hadn't even noticed I was gone. The city lights blurred through the rain on my eyelashes. Each step felt like grinding glass deeper into my soul. It wasn't just the kiss. It was everything it represented. The late nights, the secretive finances, the emotional distance, the way she looked through me rather than at me lately. The kiss wasn't the cause. It was the symptom. The undeniable public confirmation that the system failure was critical, the corruption complete. By the time I finally, mechanically, found my way back towards our building, the sky was beginning to soften from inky black to a bruised pre-dawn purple. It must have been past 4 a.m. The streets were deserted, slick and gleaming under the streetlights. Our apartment tower loomed ahead, usually a symbol of our shared success, now feeling like a monument to a colossal lie. Her car, the sleek German sedan she adored, wasn't in its usual spot in the residence garage. Good. I let myself into the penthouse. The keycard slid smoothly. The lock clicked open with electronic precision. Inside, the apartment was dark, silent. The floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a city slowly waking up oblivious. I didn't turn on any lights. I walked into the living room, our living room filled with Olivia's carefully chosen art and furniture, and sank onto the expensive Italian sofa. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was oppressive, heavy, the kind of silence that presses down on your chest, making it hard to breathe. It amplified the frantic pounding in my ears, the echo of a life imploding. I sat there motionless in the dark, watching the city lights blur and sharpen through eyes that felt gritty and hot, even though no tears came. Not yet. The confirmation was too raw, too absolute for tears. It was simply data received, processed, the conclusion unavoidable. The foundation wasn't cracked. It was gone. Dawn crept into the Seattle sky, painting streaks of gray and dirty orange above the Cascades. I hadn't moved. Still sitting on that damned expensive sofa in the dark, the silence of the penthouse stretching taut around me. The city outside was humming to life, traffic starting its distant roar, the first ferries tracing white lines across the gray water. Inside felt like a tomb. Around 6:15 a.m., I heard the telltale electronic beep of the keycard at the front door, followed by the soft click of the lock disengaging. She was back. Olivia tiptoed in, clearly expecting the apartment to be empty, or for me to be safely asleep in the bedroom, oblivious. And she was still in the emerald gown, now slightly rumpled. She carried her ridiculously high heels in one hand, barefoot on the cool concrete floor. Her elaborate hairstyle had started to unravel, tendrils escaping around her face, and her makeup, flawless hours ago, was smudged around the eyes, the portrait of exhausted post-gala glamour. She padded quietly towards the bedroom hallway, likely planning to slip into bed and pretend this was just another late night. Then she saw me, sitting there, motionless. In the dim morning light filtering through the mass of windows, her breath hitched audibly, her eyes widened, pupils blown wide in the gloom. Pure, undiluted panic flashed across her face, tightening her features. It was a fleeting micro-expression, quickly masked, but I saw it. In that split second, I saw the calculation, the frantic scramble in her mind for the right script, the right angle. She opened her mouth, probably to launch into some pre-rehearsed explanation. "Oh my God, Ethan, you scared me. I didn't know you were up. The gala ran so late. Vance was introducing me to everyone. Some plausible narrative designed to soothe and deflect, but I didn't give her the chance. Before a single syllable could escape her lips, I stood up. My body felt stiff, alien. I didn't look at her directly, didn't meet that wide-eyed, panicked gaze. I simply walked past her, brushing close enough to smell the faint, lingering scent of expensive perfume mixed with something else. Vance's cologne, maybe? The stale tang of champagne? I walked towards the foyer, grabbed my keys from the small ceramic dish where they always sat, and headed for the door. Ethan? Her voice was tentative, laced with disbelief. This wasn't in the script. My silence, my refusal to engage, had just deleted her entire scene. I didn't respond. I didn't slam the door. I didn't offer a parting glare. I just opened it, stepped out into the hallway, and let it click softly shut behind me, leaving her standing alone in the vast, silent apartment, her flimsy excuses dissolving in the air. The power dynamic, the one she'd so carefully controlled, had just flipped. My silence was louder than any accusation I could have hurled. And here's the thing she didn't know. The crucial piece of data missing from her panicked calculations. The kiss at the gala wasn't a revelation. It was merely confirmation. A public performance of a betrayal I already knew was running deep in the system. My suspicions hadn't just been based on gut feelings or changed behavior. Being a software architect conditions you to look for patterns, for anomalies, for the digital breadcrumbs people inevitably leave behind. Months ago, grappling with that gnawing unease, I started paying closer attention not by snooping, but by observing the data trails within our shared digital ecosystem. It started with our shared cloud storage. We used it for everything: photos, documents, backups. One night, running a routine check on backup integrity, I noticed unusually large data packets being transferred, and then quickly deleted, remnants lingering in the system logs. Curiosity piqued, I dug deeper, recovering fragments from the encrypted trash. Not incriminating photos, nothing so clumsy. But file names, financial spreadsheets I didn't recognize, travel itineraries for cities Olivia had never mentioned visiting for work, PDFs labeled with project names unrelated to her gallery, red flags. Then came the financials. We had linked accounts, monitored through a fairly sophisticated personal finance tracker I'd initially set up for budgeting. Small irregularities started popping up. Repeated charges at high-end restaurants I'd never been to with her, usually during times she claimed to be working late, a recurring payment to a boutique hotel downtown, and then, the one that made my blood run cold, sizable transfers masked as art acquisitions, routed through a shell company I couldn't initially trace, until I cross-referenced the company's registration details with known associates of Julian Vance. Bingo! The final piece clicked into place accidentally. Olivia had borrowed my tablet, claiming her own was charging, to quickly review some artist portfolios. Later picking it up, I found she hadn't fully logged out of a secure messaging app she favored. A notification banner flashed briefly at the top, a new message preview. From JV. The content was mundane, something about meeting later, but the casual intimacy of the handle, the existence of this private channel, it confirmed the pattern. I remember sitting there, tablet in hand, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. One specific recovered message fragment from weeks earlier echoed in my mind. It was Olivia, responding to JDV. Had to get creative with the invoicing on the Moreau piece. E would ask questions. E. That was me. She wasn't just cheating, she was actively concealing financial transactions, using our shared resources to facilitate her affair. The trust wasn't just broken, it was being systematically exploited. So seeing them at the gala wasn't a shock. It was the final data point in a grim analysis. It showed me the sheer audacity, the depth of the deception. She wasn't just having an affair, she had built a parallel life, funded partially by the one we supposedly shared. Leaving the apartment that morning, I didn't drive aimlessly. I drove straight to a pre-booked corporate apartment in South Lake Union. Sterile, anonymous, paid for with my personal funds weeks ago as a contingency. Not hiding, just relocating my base of operations. Detached, clinical. I needed to observe the next phase, not as a wounded husband, but as a systems analyst watching a compromised network. What happens when the primary user believes the admin is offline? It didn't take long to find out. 2 evenings later, I was sitting in a minimalist coffee shop across the street from our building, nursing a black Americano, laptop open but screen dark. From my vantage point, I had a clear view of the main entrance and the parking garage ramp. Right on schedule around 7:30 p.m., a car I recognize, Julian Vance's ostentatious Italian sports car, obscenely out of place among the Priuses and Teslas, purred smoothly down the ramp into the residence section. My section. The spot next to where my own car should have been. He didn't emerge for a few minutes, probably waiting for her signal. Then the lobby doors slid open, and Olivia stepped out, looking composed, elegant in casual clothes. She glanced around quickly before waving him in. They walked into the elevator together, her hand briefly touching his arm, like they owned the place, like I was just a ghost, a forgotten password. I didn't move, didn't storm over, didn't call. I simply took a sip of my cooling coffee, noted the date and time in a secure digital file, and watched the lights flick on in our penthouse windows high above. The reality hardened in my chest, no longer a suspicion or a data point, but a cold, solid fact. She hadn't just betrayed me, she'd invited the enemy into the heart of the Citadel, and she had no idea she'd just handed me all the ammunition I would ever need. She was too busy living her fantasy, unaware the ground beneath her feet was already gone, systematically removed by the very person whose silence she mistook for surrender. I wasn't gone. I was just compiling the error report. The days following my quiet departure from the penthouse weren't spent wallowing or raging. That initial hollow shock had solidified into something else. Cold, hard resolve. If Olivia thought my silence meant paralysis, she was about to discover just how wrong she was. While she was likely testing the waters of her newfound freedom with Vance, I was deep in execution mode. My first calls weren't to friends or family seeking solace. They were to professionals. I engaged Miriam Thorne, a divorce attorney whose reputation in Seattle for handling complex, high-asset dissolutions involving tech equity and intellectual property was legendary. She was sharp, pragmatic, and utterly unfazed by the preliminary evidence I laid out, the financial traces, the timeline, the Gala incident. "Standard infidelity playbook, Mr. Davies," she'd stated calmly across her minimalist glass desk, overlooking the bustling Amazon campus. But the commingling of funds for concealed acquisitions and the potential misuse of shared assets for the affair, that gives us leverage, significant leverage. Next, I brought in a forensic accountant, a specialist recommended by Miriam, whose expertise was unraveling tangled digital finances. I gave him secure, encrypted access to the data I'd compiled, the suspicious transactions, the shell company links, the recovered message fragments. His job? To build an unshakable financial narrative of Olivia's deception, quantifying exactly how much of our money had funded her secret life. While the professionals worked their angles, I executed my own silent offensive on the digital front. It was meticulous, systematic. I worked through a checklist like debugging critical code. New, unique passwords generated by a secure algorithm and stored offline were implemented across every single personal account. Banking, investments, credit cards, email, cloud services, even obscure forms I hadn't used in years. Two-factor authentication was hardened everywhere possible. Shared accounts were trickier. I logged every shared platform, utilities, streaming services, smart home controls, the lights, the thermostat, the security system she insisted on, online grocery delivery, the works. One by one, access was changed, passwords updated, registered email addresses switched solely to my private one, shared user permissions revoked. Olivia wouldn't be locked out immediately from everything. That would alert her too soon. But her control, her seamless access to the infrastructure of our life was being quietly dismantled node by node. Our primary joint checking and savings accounts were dealt with swiftly. Following Miriam's precise instructions, I electronically transferred exactly 50% of the liquid balances, my documented half, into newly opened individual accounts under my sole control. Then, and only then, were notifications sent via Miriam's office to Olivia and the banks, freezing the remaining joint funds pending legal review. The joint credit cards were similarly frozen. Let her explain the charges at that boutique hotel to Miriam. My personal stock options from the startup, vested and unvested, were reviewed with my attorney to ensure they were ring-fenced as separate property where legally possible. Any intellectual property related to personal projects, code bases stored on potentially shared home network drives, all secured, backed up offline, and legally firewalled. The penthouse itself, heavily mortgaged but representing our largest joint asset, was addressed via a formal legal notice proposing an immediate appraisal and outlining two options. She buys me out at fair market value, difficult given the evidence of her financial infidelity, or we agree to sell immediately, splitting the proceeds after accounting for the funds she'd improperly diverted. Checkmate. Before initiating the full freeze and legal notices, I made one last, quiet visit to the apartment. I used my keycard midday, when I knew from checking the building's basic non-intrusive traffic logs, a perk of knowing the system admin, that she was out, likely at the gallery or lunching with Vance. The place felt alien. Sunlight streamed through the huge windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It was silent, sterile. I didn't linger. I didn't look at the photos on the shelves, didn't touch her things. I went straight to the kitchen counter. There sat the La Marzocco Linea Mini, a beautiful, ridiculously expensive espresso machine I'd saved for, researched for months, and finally bought 2 Christmases ago. Making coffee together each morning, dialing in the grind, steaming the milk just right, it had been our ritual, one of the few stable routines left in the decaying structure of our marriage. Now, imagining her making coffee for him on it, it felt like a violation. Methodically, I gathered the machine, its heavy-duty grinder, my collection of specialized tampers and filters, the bag of single-origin beans I'd just opened. It took 2 trips using a collapsible hand truck I'd brought to get it all down to my car, parked several blocks away. I left nothing behind. No note, no sign of forced entry. Just an empty space on the marble countertop. A conspicuous void where our morning ritual used to live. Let her wake up to that. Let her wonder what else was quietly disappearing. That evening, with the legal wheels turning and the digital walls secured, I drove east, away from the city's great skies and suffocating memories. I headed towards the Cascade Mountains, towards a small, isolated cabin I'd rented weeks prior under an assumed name, payable only in cash. No Wi-Fi, spotty cell service, just towering pines, the rush of a nearby river, and the crackle of a wood-burning stove. It wasn't a retreat for licking wounds. It was a strategic withdrawal, a place to disconnect from the noise, to process the data dump of the past few years with clarity, away from the constant pings and notifications of a life I was actively dismantling. I needed to think, to plan the final stages, and to let the silence, this time my silence, do its work on Olivia back in Seattle. She thrived on engagement, on reaction, on controlling the narrative. I was about to introduce her to the profound, unnerving power of a dial tone. Up in the Cascades, the silence was profound. It was broken only by the wind sighing through the massive pines, the crackle of the fire in the stove, and the rush of the nearby river. It was a cleansing silence, a necessary reset. Back in Seattle, I imagined the silence was having a very different effect on Olivia. In the first couple of days, she probably felt relief. Irritation, maybe, at my abrupt departure, but relief that there hadn't been a messy, screaming confrontation at the apartment. She likely assumed I'd gone off somewhere to sulk, to process, and would eventually resurface, ready for the dramatic showdown she'd no doubt been rehearsing. She could spin this. He's overreacting. He's emotionally withdrawn. It was just a meaningless kiss. She could frame it, control it. But the silence stretched. One day bled into 2, then 3. My phone, the number she knew, remained off. Disconnected, actually. Text vanished into the digital void, marked only as delivered, never read. Calls went straight to a generic network recording. The number you have dialed is not in service. Emails sent to my old personal address likely bounced back with an undeliverable error. The first real crack in her composure probably happened financially. Maybe a joint credit card declined when she tried to buy groceries online. Perhaps an automatic bill payment for a utility, linked to a joint account I'd frozen, failed to go through, resulting in a curt service interruption notice. Small things at first, but jarring. Inconvenient. Then bigger things. Trying to access our shared investment portfolio online, only to be met with an invalid credentials message. Calling the bank about the joint account, only to be politely informed by a manager that a legal hold was in place, pending instruction from both parties' legal counsel. Counsel she didn't even know I had retained. Panic would have begun to set in. This wasn't sulking. This wasn't a predictable emotional reaction. This felt deliberate, strategic, cold. I could picture her pacing the penthouse, the sleek espresso machine's absence a constant glaring reminder on the counter, checking her phone obsessively, trying my work email, only to get an automated out-of-office reply stating I was on indefinite leave. Maybe she even drove by my startup's office, trying to catch me coming or going, only to find my parking spot empty, my access badge already deactivated remotely. She might have tried calling mutual friends, fishing for information, adopting a tone of faux concern. "Have you heard from Ethan?" He just left. "I'm so worried." She likely doubled down on her connection with Julian Vance, seeking reassurance, perhaps trying to accelerate their timeline now that I was out of the picture. Maybe they had dinner at the penthouse, trying to normalize his presence there. But the silence from my end, the unanswered questions, the growing financial anomalies, must have cast a pall over everything. The narrative she wanted, wronged wife finding solace, wasn't playing out. She was losing control of the story. From the quiet solitude of my cabin, after nearly 2 weeks of calculated silence, I decided it was time. Time to remove any lingering doubt, any shred of plausible deniability she might be clinging to. I compiled a concise, devastating digital package. Key excerpts from the forensic accountant's report, highlighting the funds diverted to Vance's shell company. Screenshots of the damning messages regarding the hidden Moreau Peace invoice. Timestamps and security log entries corroborating Vance's visits to the penthouse, cross-referenced with her fabricated work schedule. I didn't send it directly. That would be emotional reactive. Instead, I securely transferred the encrypted file to Miriam Thorne. Her instructions were clear. Forward this package immediately to Olivia's legal counsel, whoever that might be. If she hadn't retained counsel yet, this would force her hand, along with a formal, non-negotiable separations agreement drafted by Miriam's team. The terms were stark. Immediate dissolution, division of assets heavily weighted in my favor due to documented financial infidelity, full waiver of spousal support, and a strict confidentiality clause. No negotiation. Sign, or we proceed to litigation with the full evidence file made public. The response wasn't immediate, but when it came, it wasn't from Olivia. It was relayed through Miriam a few days later. Olivia had predictably scrambled to hire a lawyer. Her counsel, after reviewing the package, had apparently contacted Miriam in a state bordering on panic. The phrase Miriam used was completely blindsided and deeply concerned. They requested an urgent meeting to discuss alternatives. Miriam's reply was simple. There are no alternatives. Advise your client to sign the agreement as presented within 72 hours, or we file. Confirmation of Olivia's state came in directly a day later. An email landed in my new private inbox. It was from Anya Sharma, a sharp VP of product I occasionally collaborated with, someone Olivia knew peripherally from company events. Anya's email was brief, carefully neutral, subject checking. And Ethan, heard through the grapevine, things might be a bit tumultuous on your end. No need to reply, just wanted to send good vibes and hope you're doing okay. Let me know if you need a neutral ear down the line. Best, Anya. Heard through the grapevine. The tech world, like the art world, thrived on gossip. News of my sudden leave, the locked accounts, Olivia's likely frantic attempts to maintain appearances while scrambling for a lawyer. It was spreading. The carefully curated image of the successful power couple was crumbling, replaced by whispers of infidelity, financial maneuvering, and a messy public implosion. And Julian Vance? Miriam mentioned, almost as an aside, that Olivia's lawyer had let slip her client was experiencing significant personal distress, as Vance had become suddenly distant since the legal proceedings began. Predictable. Vance collected beautiful things, but he abhorred complications, especially public, expensive ones. Olivia wasn't a prize acquisition anymore, she was damaged goods, attached to a potentially costly scandal. The silence hadn't just disrupted Olivia's plans, it had triggered a system-wide crash. Her narrative control gone, her financial security compromised, her lover retreating, her reputation tarnished. She wasn't just losing me, she was losing the entire fabricated world she'd built around her affair. She was alone in the wreckage, finally forced to confront the cost of her choices, stripped of her power to spin the story. The panic wasn't just about consequences anymore, it was existential. The end, when it came, was anticlimactic, almost disappointingly swift. Faced with the irrefutable digital and financial trail, the non-negotiable terms, and likely zero support from the rapidly distancing Julian Vance, Olivia folded. Miriam informed me via a brief, encrypted email. Olivia's counsel had returned the separation agreement, signed and notarized less than 48 hours after receiving Miriam's ultimatum. No last-minute pleas, no attempts at renegotiation, just capitulation. The legal machinery processed the dissolution with bureaucratic efficiency. There were no court appearances, no depositions, no airing of dirty laundry in front of strangers. Just digital documents signed, assets formally divided according to the agreement, and a final decree issued electronically. It felt less like the dramatic end of a marriage, and more like closing out a failed project account. Clean, decisive, final. Back in the quiet solitude of the Cascade cabin with the legalities settled, I finally had the space to reflect beyond the immediate tactical maneuvers. Why had it all gone so wrong? It wasn't just Olivia's choices, her infidelity, her deceit. Looking back with brutal honesty, I saw my own role, not in causing her betrayal, but perhaps in allowing the environment for it to fester. Had I been too absorbed in my work? Too complacent in the routines? Had I mistaken comfortable silence for genuine connection? Maybe. But the core issue, I realized, wasn't about my perceived shortcomings. It was about Olivia's fundamental inability to confront her own dissatisfaction honestly. Instead of talking, instead of admitting she felt trapped or bored or desired something different, she chose the path of the least resistance. Deception. Building a secret life was easier than fixing the existing one. Blaming me, or our life together implicitly through her actions, was less confronting than examining her mundane desires and fears. I'd spent years meticulously coding, building, and maintaining a life, a partnership, that she had quietly, fundamentally abandoned long before that kiss at the gala. I was patching code on a server she had already unplugged, understanding that wasn't about blame. It was about clarity. Necessary, painful clarity. The fallout for Olivia, from what I gathered indirectly through legal channels and the occasional unavoidable whisper from the Seattle grapevine, was significant. The penthouse, as stipulated, was sold quickly, likely below market value to expedite the process. The proceeds were divided according to the agreement, leaving her with substantially less than she'd anticipated, especially after covering her own legal fees. Word travels fast in interconnected circles like Seattle's art and tech scenes. Whispers of financial impropriety and messy affairs tend to stick. I heard secondhand she'd left her curator position, whether by choice or by force. I didn't know, or care to find out. Julian Vance predictably vanished from her orbit entirely. She was adrift, the architect of her own isolation. A few weeks after the divorce was finalized, long after I left the cabin and severed my last ties to Seattle, a single email slipped through a filter into my new inbox. The sender address was unfamiliar, anonymized, but the writing style was unmistakably hers. It wasn't long, maybe 2 paragraphs. No apologies, not really. No excuses. Just a strange, fragmented reflection. She wrote that she never believed I would actually do anything, that she'd prepared for every possible argument, every emotional outburst, but never for the crushing weight of calculated silence. She said she now understood too late, not just what she had thrown away, but the quiet strength I possessed that she had mistaken for passivity. She ended by saying she wouldn't contact me again. I read it once, sitting in my new, sparsely furnished apartment overlooking the rolling hills outside Austin, Texas. The words didn't sting, didn't trigger anger or sadness. They felt distant, like reading an archived error log from a decommissioned system. I dragged the email to the trash folder and emptied it. Her realization, her regret, whatever it was her burden to carry now, not mine. It couldn't reach me here. Austin was different. The air hummed with a restless, innovative energy, less constrained than Seattle's established tech scene. Sunshine felt abundant, a welcome change from the perpetual Pacific Northwest drizzle. My apartment was smaller, simpler, filled only with things I chose. No shared histories embedded in the furniture, no ghosts in the hallways. I started working on a passion project, an app concept I'd shelved years ago. Coding felt creative again, liberating, not just a job. The quiet wasn't oppressive anymore, it was expansive, filled with possibility. It took time, maybe 3 months, maybe 4. But one morning I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about Olivia or the wreckage of our marriage in days. Not consciously, not subconsciously. The background processes had finally stopped running. Peace. Not a dramatic revelation, just a quiet settling in my bones. I met Sarah at a local coffee shop known for its reliable Wi-Fi and quiet corners favored by developers and writers. I went there most afternoons to work on my app. She was usually there too, absorbed in a book, pointedly ignoring her phone. No dramatic meet-cute, no sparks flying across the room. One afternoon we both reached for the last oat milk carton at the condiment bar. We laughed, started talking. about coding, about hiking trails around Austin, about the absurdity of startup culture, about weird childhood dreams. It was easy, natural, human. She listened not out of politeness, but with genuine curiosity. We didn't talk about exes or heartbreaks. We didn't need to compare scars. And it felt like a beginning, clean code, a fresh start. Looking back now, standing on my own 2 feet in a life I built from the ground up after the demolition, I understand. I didn't get revenge on Olivia. I didn't get dramatic closure. What I got was far more valuable. I got myself back. I learned that walking away isn't weakness, it's often the strongest move you can make. That silence used strategically isn't passive, it's potent. It allows you to regain control, not over others, but over yourself. The most powerful thing wasn't exposing her lies or watching her world crumble. It was leaving the room, quietly shutting the door behind me, and choosing to build something new, something solid, something entirely my own. And that peace, that freedom, that's worth more than any victory ever could be.